Really excited about this next section of the program. Hope you enjoyed dinner tonight. I had a great dinner and a wonderful table. We've gathered this evening to present the 2018 American Patriot Award to two exceptional Americans, the Honorable James A. Baker III and the Honorable Leon Panetta. Americans who have truly demonstrated profound service to their country and whose global leadership significantly contributed to democratic ideals, diplomacy, global peace. I mean, there's no doubt about that if you look around the world and all they've done. The American Patriot Award symbolizes the National Defense University's mission of educating, developing, inspiring strategic leaders through a comprehensive, collaborative academic experience to anticipate and confront national and global security challenges. So the leaders, the men and women of wisdom, strength, and character, innovative, imaginative, disruptive thinkers who will personally lead the charge in the United States and their respective countries around the world to find new ways to integrate military and civilian, foreign, domestic, public and private sectors, new ways to leverage and synchronize the wisdom and knowledge and experience that they gain and presented in disparate parts of our national and international security structure, forging really new partnerships, strengthening existing ones, all of this coming together to overcome shared threats around the world and changing and the dealing with the threats and the challenges to our collective national security, ultimately achieving the shared goal of universal peace. The 2008 American Patriot Award is presented to the 62nd Secretary of State, the Honorable James A. Baker III, and the 23rd Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Leon Panetta. This evening, our distinguished honorees are going to participate in a discussion on national and international defense, diplomacy, and peacekeeping. Please welcome Secretaries Baker and Panetta. Gentlemen. The standing O. That's good. That's got to be a good feeling. Thank you for doing this. This is a great place, and we have some big issues to talk about. Today, obviously, was a breaking news day with the Iran deal. I guess I'd like to get your perspective on that move today and what potentially comes next with this administration and what happened today pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. Secretary Baker.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure anybody can tell you exactly what's going to happen next because I don't think anybody really knows. I will have to say that, in my opinion, Brett, the deal was questionable to begin with. I don't believe it is an extraordinarily great deal for the United States. Having said that, I think that because it doesn't cover ballistic missiles, it sunsets after 10 years, it doesn't cover terrorist activities in the region by Iran. So I would have preferred to see us not get into that negotiation to begin with. Once we got into it and came to an agreement on a agreement, then I don't think it's in our best interest to just abruptly pull out unless we do know what's going to happen next. And I don't think anybody knows right now where our allies are going to be on this. If they're with us, that's great. If we were going to pull out, I would have liked to see us make sure that we had our allies with us when we pull out so that we could keep sanctions. The only reason the Iranians came to the table was the strength of sanctions. And if they're not with us, we're going to lose those sanctions. We have our own, but unilateral sanctions don't work as well as multilateral sanctions. So I'm not sure where we go from here. I wouldn't have gotten into that discussion to begin with. Having gotten into it, I'm not sure I would have pulled out of it abruptly unless I knew that our allies were going to be there with us.
Secretary Panetta, is the prospect of getting Iran back to a table to renegotiate another deal a realistic one?
No, I don't believe so. I think the fact that the president basically has torn up that agreement has sent a signal to Iran that it isn't worth going back to the table because they're not sure, even if they negotiated, whether or not the president would be there. And I think that's one of the prices that's being paid here. Look, I had Reince Priebus out at the Panetta Institute, and we were talking about kind of how the president operates. And he said something that really impacted on me, because I think it's true, which is that this president operates by chaos, and that he uses chaos as leverage. And I think that's what we're seeing right now, is there are, I mean, when he walked away from TTP, he tore it up. But the problem was there was no strategy as to where we were going after that. And he did the same thing with regards to the Paris Agreement, and still, where was the next step? And he did it on tariffs. I mean, imposing the tariffs, but where are we going with that? And the same thing is true for Iran, which is, basically throwing the agreement out. But what's the next step? And I think Jim's right. Nobody knows what's going to happen next.
So let's just say this. We are where we are. Let's say, like, erase all the past. Say we are where we are. You two are experts. How do we avoid Israel-Iranian Hezbollah war as we are watching Iran react to what has just happened?
Well, I think, we're going to be there for Israel if her security is threatened, if she's attacked. There's no doubt about that. I don't care whether you have a Democratic president or a Republican president. But we shouldn't have to be there if that attack is provoked, okay? If it's really an attack against the country, then we need to be there. But not unless it is exactly that. Let me back up a minute, though, to the Iran, pulling out of the Iran agreement. We wouldn't be in this place today if the Obama administration had done what they really should have done, and that is send that agreement to the Senate for ratification as a treaty. Then we wouldn't be here debating all this. And that's what should have happened.
But you know why they didn't.
They didn't do it because they didn't think they'd get it through.
They didn't have the votes.
Because there wasn't that good an agreement. So they didn't think they'd get it through. So they just said, we're going to treat it as an executive agreement. But we wouldn't be here in this situation if they sent it to the Senate for ratification.
I think what Jim's pointing out is something that I think has really changed, which is, it's a little bit like my concern about the dysfunction up on Capitol Hill. Because in my time, I saw Washington work, and I've seen Washington not work. In our day, we worked together. He was in a Republican administration. I was with the Democrats on the Hill. But we worked together on legislation, and we were able to do a lot of things. Ronald Reagan passed an awful lot of legislation that was bipartisan. What we're losing today is the ability to use our diplomatic capability to be able to get things done. And so it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of negotiation. It takes a lot of capability. And if you think you can slam dunk these agreements, you're crazy. It takes work. It takes preparation. It takes caution. It takes a lot of negotiation. And I think if, in fact, there had been that kind of careful negotiation that keeps the Senate informed of what you're doing. Because
engaged,
I think when we did arms control, the Senate knew pretty much what we were working on.
Well, because we had to get those treaties ratified.
You bet.
Yeah.
And so if you're working with the Congress and you're negotiating and they know where you're headed, then you have a much better chance of getting it approved by the Senate. If you're not, we're going to continue to have situations where agreements will be made, but because you can't pass it on the Hill, you just try to put it into effect through executive.
So last thing on this, for foreign governments, if they look at the U.S. essentially pulling out of this agreement, not a treaty, an agreement, the opponents of this move say that sends the signal to foreign countries that when the U.S. gets an agreement, who knows, administration to administration, whether you're going to stay in it. Is that a concern tonight?
Yeah, sure, it's a concern. I don't know how big a concern it is, quite frankly. The reason North Korea is talking to us is because the sanctions were biting them. But as Leon pointed out, this agreement with North Korea is not going to be all that easy to do. A good agreement, a verifiable agreement, anywhere, any place, anytime, on the ground, is going to be hard to get. My worry about the North Korean deal is we've seen this movie before, and we've seen it a lot. We saw it the first time in 1994 in the Clinton administration. Then we had the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations. Three eight-year administrations, all try to appease North Korea, and it didn't work. So are we going to accept a promise? Suppose they say we're going to denuclearize the peninsula. What does that mean? What does it mean? What it means to them is probably a lot different than what it means to us or what it ought to mean to us.
So that's a great transition. Secretary Pompeo, the new Secretary of State, is on the ground as we speak at this hour in Pyongyang. Going bet is that he is, as part of the laying the groundwork for these talks, going to leave probably with the 3 Americans who've been held hostage. That's out there, likely. What should we think about these talks? You mentioned some concerns about them, but as the administration gets ready to do this in the next couple of weeks, what are the landmines?
Well, look, the landmines have been there time and time again. We know damn well what the landmines are, because
he says he's going to walk if he doesn't.
Look, North Korea is in many ways, from an intelligence point of view, from a strategic point of view, it's an easy read. North Korea's first goal is to protect its regime. That's been true for all of the Kims. Protect our regime. How do you protect our regime? By developing nuclear weapons. And so the idea that somehow they're going to walk in and denuclearize and that they're going to suddenly say we're going to get rid of it all goes right to the heart of why North Korea exists, which is to protect the regime. So they're not going to just throw their hands up and say denuclearize. Which doesn't mean we shouldn't negotiate, which doesn't mean we shouldn't try to work something out on a transitional basis. But the problem I see is that takes a lot of work. I mean, the Secretary of State knows damn well, if you're preparing for a summit between the President of the United States and Kim Jong-un, you've got to do a lot of preparation. And you've got to determine what steps are you going to take to denuclearize on a transitional basis? How are you going to verify it? How are you going to do the inspections? How are you going to develop some kind of cap on testing, both for nuclear testing as well as missile testing? How are you going to be able to develop some kind of transition in terms of force structure? All of that needs careful work.
So what I hear from you is this is a bit of policy on the fly.
My concern is if they're going to have a summit in a couple weeks, I don't think the president is going to be prepared, even with Pompeo's visit, to be able to go in and really develop the kind of comprehensive agreement that has to be done, which isn't to say they shouldn't meet. That's fine. Go ahead and meet. But the reality is that, seems from my point of view, that the best you can hope for is they'll agree on a framework, they'll agree on some goals, and then put the negotiators to work. That's the most hopeful approach. But if they have a summit and it ends in a disaster because they can't work out anything, I think that
then
means
you're
real
worse
trouble.
off than you were before.
Yeah.
But we got the same problem here we had with the Iran deal. I mean, we've got to be extremely careful to bring our alliance partners along with us.
So talk a little bit about that.
Australia, Japan, South Korea, others who've participated in sanctions against North Korea, including, by the way, China. China is not happy with what North Korea has been doing. They don't want to see a nuclear armed Korean peninsula, and we don't either. So there is room there for cooperation. If I were king and I'd been driving this issue from the beginning, I would have gone to Xi Jinping and I would have said, look, you don't like what's happening there. We don't like what's happening there. Tell you what we'll do. We will sign a peace treaty with North Korea, ending the Korean War. We will give full recognition to any government you put in power in North Korea that repudiates the acquisition or maintenance of nuclear weapons. We will trade with it. We will exchange full diplomatic relations with it. Your only job is to put a government in power there that doesn't seek to acquire or maintain nuclear weapons. I think we could have cut that deal with China. Now, we're beyond that. We're negotiating directly with North Korea. The verification part of any agreement is going to be where the rubber meets the road on this. And I just hope we don't just take a promise.
So how about those relationships? I mean, South Korea, a lot of people have looked at South Korea as not the new leadership, not particularly warm to the U.S. overall.
No, they're not.
I mean, they are trying to trade with the U.S., but not as much as the last administration there. Right. So vis-a-vis this dynamic, how do you deal with something like the South China Sea, for example? You know, where you're dealing with China and trying to rally allies. It's a three-dimensional chess.
Well, that's a different issue, of course, but it's a very serious and important issue. What we need to do first and foremost is to make sure we maintain a very robust presence in the Pacific in the form of the 7th Fleet. We need to continue to do all of our freedom of navigation exercises. We need to look at the full range of diplomatic, political, and economic sanctions for any behavior there that is against international norms. And that's the only way I know to approach that. Having said that, there's a bigger issue, of course, and that's the emergence of China as the new global superpower. They're already an economic superpower, but this is the biggest geopolitical and geostrategic challenge facing American policymakers today, how we react to the emergence of China. It's extremely important for the United States to have the best possible relationship we can have with China. It's extremely important for China to have the best possible relationship they can with the United States. So we have to look at it in that way. There are areas where we can cooperate with China. There are areas where we will have to confront China. Where we can cooperate, we should. On the differences, we need to manage those differences and manage them very carefully.
But how do you assess Xi?
I think that it goes to that diplomatic challenge. I had the honor of actually meeting with President Xi when I was Secretary of Defense. And I actually met with him here before he became president and came out to the Pentagon. I have to tell you that even though, he's obviously concentrating power, he's a very thoughtful guy, and he speaks very directly. I mean, most presidents, as Jim knows, when you sit down with a leader of another country, they usually have some talking points they have to go through. And so you have to play this game of talking points. Xi had no talking points. He basically was concerned about our redistributing our power to the Pacific. That was one of the things we had in our defense plan. And he was concerned about that. And I said, look, we're a Pacific power. You're a Pacific power. We have common interests. You're concerned about terrorism. You're concerned about North Korea. You're concerned about trade. You're concerned about freedom of the seas. Those are issues we're concerned about. Yeah. And so we can work together. And he said, you know, we can, because in the end, this is about peace and prosperity. I think the key to China is to communicate, to be there, to talk with them, to negotiate, but do it from strength, which means we have to have our Navy power in the Pacific, and we have to be clear that they have to protect the freedom of the seas in the South China Sea.
How does the tariff situation factor into that? The trade tariff war back and forth.
Well, as I said, this is again, look, this trade issue has been something we've fought over, both parties in many ways have fought over, but the bottom line was that in a global world, you want to protect free trade. That's important to our economy. And yes, you have to be tough negotiators, and yes, you have to protect your interests, but you're not going to engage in a trade war. Trade war would be a disaster. So the key right now is, having implemented these tariffs, I think the real test is going to be, is there a strategy to negotiate so that you can try to move forward with some agreements that will allow trade to take place and will not result in a trade war?
You know, I think I understand politics. I've done a lot of it, and I've got the scars to show for it. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that this administration has made was to pull us out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because that was not just an important issue economically. That was a really important issue geostrategically for America's leadership role in the Pacific. And we've withdrawn now, and China is filling that void. There's some, as I read or hear your report,
thank you, sir.
Some indications that we may be trying to claw our way back into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That was a terrible mistake to leave that. Leon's absolutely right. Trade wars, nobody wins trade wars. Free trade used to be the holy grail of the left in this country, right. The political left and the political right. The consensus for free trade has gone down the tube, and that's too bad, because yes, there are losers anytime you have a free trade agreement, but there are more winners than losers. And generally speaking, free trade creates economic growth, and that's what creates jobs.
Let's bounce around the world here. Understanding that Russia's actions have caused some re-energizing of NATO because of its expansionist efforts. What do you think about the fundamental strength, the status of the alliance today, NATO, and look forward about Russia?
NATO is incredibly important to our ability to provide for national security. NATO obviously was the first to be established as a bulwark in dealing with Russia. It's proven successful in that effort. But more importantly, NATO has shown the ability to be able to adjust its mission. After 9/11, NATO became, because of Article 5, they helped us in wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan. You heard the ambassador talk about UAE, fighting wars alongside the United States. So we used NATO in a way that really did protect our national security on a number of fronts. Now, NATO is important. We've got to continue to provide leadership for NATO, though. NATO doesn't work without U.S. leadership. You can't stand back and say, you guys take care of it. The United States has to be there, has to be at the table, because, frankly, if the United States doesn't lead, nobody else does.
That's right.
That's the problem. And so that is the essential ingredient here. Of course, European countries need to provide more money for NATO. Of course, they need to develop capabilities like refueling. We do a lot of the refueling. We do a lot of the drones and reconnaissance. They need to develop those capabilities. But they can only do that with U.S. leadership. But it is absolutely essential to make clear to Russia that NATO is alive and well, and that we will abide by Article 5.
Mr. Secretary, you were at the tip of the spear of unwinding the Cold War from a U.S. perspective. Yeah. I know because I just wrote a book about it. It's out Tuesday. It's called 3 Days in Moscow, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of the Soviet Empire.
You need to get that
to a bookstore near you. I didn't tell him I was going to do that, but that's all right. You're in there a lot. Anyway, as you assess Vladimir Putin and what he's trying to do, is he trying to kind of re-energize the old Soviet Union with attacks, expansion, the cyber stuff?
Look,
what do you think he's trying to do?
I can't read his mind, and I don't know what he's trying to do. I want to tell you that I was there at the end of the Cold War, when we won the Cold War, and I want to tell you something else. For 15 years, after the collapse of communism and the implosion of the Soviet Union, we had pretty damn good relations with Russia under Boris Yeltsin and under Vladimir Putin. And there was cooperation, and there were joint efforts, and beyond just space, but other things as well. That's all gone to pot. It hadn't gone to pot because of us, in my opinion. It's gone to pot because of them. Did he get in trouble domestically, politically domestically, and need a whipping boy? I don't know. But he has turned NATO into a whipping boy. Don't think for 1 minute we're not back into a full-fledged Cold War. We are. And you ask what should we be doing about it? We ought to be doing the very same things we did when we fought the first Cold War over 40 years. And we ought to be confronting Russia when she's unreasonable the way she has been, buzzing our ships, buzzing our airplanes. I know it's not... I mean, I'm a Secretary of State. He's a Secretary of Defense. He may not be able to say this. I think we ought to shoot one of those airplanes down. I mean, I really mean it. I mean, the Turks shot one of them down, and guess what? Nothing happened, did it, Leon?
That's right, exactly.
Nothing.
Yeah.
But it's
there weren't
too
a lot
bad.
of planes after that.
It really is regrettable that we saw the progress we saw ending that conflict. And now we're right back into it. And we're into it not because of the United States or our allies. We're into it because
what about that? The new Cold War?
I think Jim is right. We are in a new chapter of the Cold War. And the reason that it happened, I mean, a lot is Putin playing his games. But I think Putin read weakness on the part of the United States and on the part of even European countries in terms of whether or not they were going to confront him for the things he was doing. And as a result of seeing that weakness, that's why he went into the Ukraine and Crimea. That's why he went into Syria. That's why he attacked our election system in the U.S., because he felt he could do it without any kind of response.
Yeah.
And if we're going to deal with Putin, which I think we can deal with Putin, but you have to deal with Putin from strength. And the best way to do that is to draw those lines that Jim talked about. You draw lines and say you are not going beyond these lines. And if you make that clear and you stick to it, then I think you can take the next step.
But before we do it, we ought to make sure we have our allies with us. You know, one of the strengths of our foreign and security policy are our worldwide alliances. So when we do this, and we should do it, definitely do it, but we need to bring our allies along behind us. Don't have a hiatus between us and our NATO allies.
Admiral Mike Rogers with the NSA is here, and we were just talking about cybersecurity. It's a little tougher to make, I think, to make the public case if there isn't an ism, a communism. Obviously, terrorism is one thing, But in this new world where we're getting attacked all the time from different state actors and bad people on computers, how do you generate the public support to fight that in a public way?
Well, people have to understand that cyber is the battlefield of the future.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is an area that is expanding on a basis that, frankly, I've never seen before in terms of the technology. And I'm on a board of a company in Silicon Valley. I mean, the development of new technology and new capabilities is incredible. And we're not the only ones doing it. So cyber can now not only interfere with service, can not only steal intellectual property, but the biggest problem is cyber can destroy. You can develop a sophisticated virus that can literally destroy computers. Iran developed the Shamoon virus, deployed it on Aramco oil in Saudi Arabia, and took down 30,000 computers. You take that same virus, you can apply it against our electric grid, you can apply it to our chemical systems, our transportation systems, our government systems, our financial systems, and paralyze this country. That is the threat. And we're not, frankly, that aware of the potential of what cyber can do. And somehow the government is going to have to take responsibility to say to the American people, this is a threat, and we damn well better deal with it.
And inform them.
Yep.
You said you were sitting next to Ambassador Al-Otaiba. The shift in the Middle East has changed. The Gulf nations have taken a different take with this administration. Your sense of that shift in the Middle East and how it affects our relations in the region?
Well, I think it's a significant shift. I think it's an important shift. As one who's worked very hard to try and promote Arab-Israeli peace, I'm happy to see the shift because you now see Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Arab states teaming up with Israel to fight ISIS, to fight terrorism, to do a lot of other things that I think are very, very important. So the chessboard has changed quite a bit since I was there some years ago. I think it's a healthy change. I think, as I said before, it's really important that we stay close to all of our allies, don't get separated. One of the worries I have about this Iran deal, our pulling out, is that it's going to create a hiatus or a vacuum between us and some of our allies. I'm afraid that they may not come along. I hope they do. I really hope they do. But if they don't, it's not a good thing.
You share that concern?
No, absolutely. I mean, look, we're living in a world now where there are a hell of a lot of flashpoints, probably more dangerous than since the end of World War II. I mean, we're confronting ISIS. We're dealing with failed states in the Middle East. We're dealing with Syria. We're dealing with North Korea. We're dealing with Iran. We're dealing with Russia. We're dealing with China. We're dealing with cyber. A whole series of crises. And the United States cannot deal with those challenges by itself and wait for the problem to explode and then react to the crisis. The way you deal with those is through alliances. The ability to work with our allies, to be able to put pressure on these different situations so that we are taking action, but we're doing it together. Look, Kim Jong-un just spent the last day sitting down with China. Why? Because he knows damn well he needs China on his side when he sits down. The United States ought to be doing the same thing with South Korea and with Japan and with the other countries in the Pacific, like Australia and others, to build the kind of alliance that says we stand together here in this negotiation.
Right, Brett, if I could just say one thing about alliances. If you look at what George H.W. Bush did in the first Gulf War, he went out, first of all, I tell people this is a textbook example of the way to fight a war. You tell the world what you're going to do, then you go out and you get the rest of the world behind you to do it, and then you go do exactly what you said you were going to do, no more, no less. You bring people home, and then you get other countries to pay for it. Well, what did he do? We did. We paid $10 billion.
That's absolutely right.
$10 billion for that war, and other people paid $65 billion for it.
I was chairman of the budget committee, and I told Jim, thank God, because we were concerned about deficits. You remember?
Well, you know, I was secretary.
Remember those days?
Hey,
remember those days?
I was Secretary of State, and I would go up and I'd testify on the Hill, and they would eat me up. Mr. Secretary, how can you talk about spending money to do this when we have all these social needs in this country? And how many Americans, by the way, is it worth to do? How many American lives is it worth to do this? Now, Leon wasn't one of those guys that beat up on me that way, but there were a lot of people who did. But I only cite that example because it shows you the leverage that you can achieve if you create alliances. But alliances need care and feeding. You have to tend to them all the time.
So as we wrap up here, if you think about the public-private synergy that is trying to be established in numerous elements of the government, what about the future role for NDU? And what can be done to facilitate the leadership that's needed going forward?
Well, look, we described the kind of world we live in which we're confronting a number of challenges. We talked about cyber. We talked about, the kind of new technologies that are being developed. The United States cannot be a world power unless we have leaders who are educated and understand the new technologies, the new kind of wars that we're going to be fighting. I mean, my God, Russia has developed a hybrid war in which they're using cyber and proxy troops and the ability to kind of undermine other countries. We're going to have to be able to deal with that. We're going to have to be able to deal with the potential of major power confrontation. All of that is going to demand leadership. NDU is in the business of protecting national security, but more importantly, is in the business of developing those leaders. And that's why NDU is absolutely critical to our ability to have a first-rate national defense.
Secretary Baker?
I second that.
Wholeheartedly.
Wholeheartedly.
Finally, before we wrap up, I want to, one more time, acknowledge our Medal of Honor recipient in the room here tonight. And you have a story about his boss.
Well, I would like to acknowledge his presence as well, because he's a Marine and I'm a Marine. And when I first became Secretary of State, first day I was in my office on the 7th floor of the State Department, an aide comes in and says, there's a gentleman on the phone, says he's Commandant of the Marine Corps, who wants to pay you a courtesy call. Would you receive him? I said, are you kidding? The Commandant of the Marine Corps? You bet I would receive him. I'd never been higher than a captain in the Marine Corps. So in comes Al Gray, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, in my office, 4 stars on each shoulder. It was all I could do not to stand up and salute. And he looked at me and he said, Mr. Secretary, this is just a brief courtesy call. I want to congratulate you on being Secretary of State, and I brought you a little gift. And he handed me a box of business cards that were printed on Marine Corps camouflage background, and it said, in the middle of the card, it said, James A. Baker III, Marine Warrior, in great big letters. And then down at the very bottom of the card, it said, and Secretary of State.
So good. Semper Fi. The hierarchy. Well, gentlemen, it's been a real honor and pleasure. You have some awards to be given. Sit
Thank you,
right
Brent.
here. We're going to bring up these folks. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Secretaries Baker and Panetta, ladies and gentlemen. To present, yeah, let's stand up here.
Hoorah.
Thank you.
To present the 2008 American Patriot Award, please welcome National Defense University President and CEO, Larry Repska, and Dr. Sheila Ronis, Chairman and National Defense University Foundation Board of Directors.
Sheila.
Ladies and gentlemen, we present you the 2018 American
Larry.
Patriot Award recipients, the Honorable James A. Baker III and the Honorable Leon Panetta.
They got it.
All right, there you go.
Thank
It's a
you,
beauty.
Ron. Thank you.
And I will send you some.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry.